So without much further ado, let's get started. And Peter, do you want to take a second to introduce yourselves, and then I'll go?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Peter Frey. I'm a field CTO here at Platform 9. I also lead our pre-sales and post-sales teams. And I'm presenting to you today from my home office here in sunny Florida, and looking forward to talking to everybody today.
Thanks, Peter. And everybody, I'm Vamsi. I'm the Chief of Strategy at Platform 9. And like Peter, I've been in the industry for a long time now. Before coming to Platform 9, I spent about 9 years at Red Hat as Chief Architect for Global Banking. Worked extensively on the OpenStack, OpenShift, CloudForms technology there. And then I went over to Hortonworks for about 2 years, where I led the global banking vertical. And then I did a stint as a CTO of a fintech in New York City. And I'm based out of Philly. And again, Peter and I are pretty much, as you can imagine, veterans of the industry. We have seen our fair share of cloud failures and cloud successes at various organizations and various enterprises. And what we've done today, and we'll talk about the goals in a second, is to really take an architect and executive's core hard look at the private cloud landscape and really talk about what works, what doesn't from our experience, and then showcase what we do at Platform 9 in that regard. Peter, next slide. So for goals of the webinar, we really have a full roster of things to talk about. Number one, we're going to do a bit of a level set for those of us who are more executives, more CXOs who are looking at this industry from a manager's point of view, is where is the private cloud in today's world? And then we'll start taking a dive deeper into the technical architecture as well. Then talk about some private cloud challenges, which we've seen customers run into while they're re-architecting data centers, or really trying to provide that Amazon or Azure or GCP kind of look and feel, self-service model, agility in their private cloud. And then we'll talk about what we've done at Platform 9 to basically relook at this landscape and dramatically reduce cost in terms of operations and increase the flexibility that folks can use, whether deploying containers or VMs or managing bare metal, and then even bringing public cloud into the equation. And then we've spent our the last 2 years of Platform 9, Peter and I, pretty much give or take a few months, trying to distill some of these best practices for private cloud success. And we'll try to present them in a very impartial and non-vendor take as much as possible. And then I'll try to hit home a few conclusions, and then we'll open up the gate for questions. So before we get into that, again, Peter, do you want to talk about the price that we have for our audience today?
Yeah, well, I'm excited to announce we have a prize for one of our live attendees. It's this Lego set. It looks like a Saturn V Lego set, and we'll because we appreciate you guys here, we're going to give this away to one lucky person, and we'll give that away at the end of the webinar. So you must be present at the end of the webinar to be able to claim the prize, and we'll pick somebody at random from that list at the end of the webinar.
Thanks, Peter. So as we get started, let me quickly take a step back and set the industry context around today's topic around private clouds and what the distilled wisdom is, if you will, from the analyst community, the Gartners, the Forresters, IDCs of the world, as well as what we see. So at the start of the webinar, I mentioned that both Peter and I have worked across technology. So we've done a lot of the operating system prior to even before cloud was in the lexicon of IT. We've done DevOps, we've done PaaS systems, we've architected, implemented them across many, many enterprises in the Fortune 500. There's a lot of truth to the fact that what is driving the re-architecture of the data center of the future is really big data, right? A lot of the need is for enterprises to be able to place workloads that result in revenue or result in a better customer experience right at the point of contact with the user. So by 2025, you have consensus that you'll have many more times the data centers that are running right now. And whatever the term and the definition of the data center is, we spent a lot of time at Platform 9 working with customers in telco and retail and manufacturing around edge use cases, because the architecture of the platform is uniquely suitable to basically be defined, to basically provision and deploy edge data centers using pure open source. But the fact is that you have the challenge of a high volume of data that's being produced as a result of business operations. And this data is moving at a high degree of velocity into your architecture. And then there is a need to basically work with multiple formats of data. So again, there's vast types of heterogeneity in the kind of applications that are being deployed. It's no longer just the three-tier app and the relational database. But again, all in all, at a global point of view, whether you're in financial services, whether you're in retail, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in telco, there'll be 5 times more compute in enterprise data centers in the next around 4 to 5 years as compared to where we are now. So again, the private cloud is not going away. It'll continue to thrive, and it'll be maybe the heart of your enterprise architecture. Next slide, Peter. So when we looked at some of the interesting trends. Obviously, public cloud is big, and spend on public cloud is growing every year. But the public cloud is not a panacea. We at Platform 9 have many customers that have invested heavily in the public cloud, only to realize that they're basically overshooting their projections of spend that they have outlined for the next 3 years, 5 years on public cloud. They're overshooting that in months. And what that means is running a data center on Amazon or in Azure, while as appealing as that sounds, is not a cost-effective proposition, even more so prior to COVID. And and that's a reality that we're faced with in the last couple of months as we really look at the world in terms of our IT budgets and things of that nature, right? So again, if you look at the projection spend, more and more customers are going to implement or plan to implement or upgrade or extend or augment their private clouds. Peter, anything to add here?
No, I was going to ask you a question. I'm wondering what you're thinking about this as a trend, right? Personally, I'm seeing more and more of the organizations that I talk to on a daily basis, who use cloud, moving away from cloud resources due to the cost of that. And I see that as a trend as the private cloud becoming more and more popular due to cost reasons. Wondering what you think about that.
No, great question, Peter. So a couple of things, right, in my mind. Obviously, the first prong is cost. Many of the customers I work with, and you work with as well, in sectors like retail, for instance, or manufacturing, feel that cost is prohibitive in terms of, so you want the self-service, you want the automation, you want the ease of getting started in the public cloud. But if you're going to be doing it at this price point, that's not going to be effective. And number two, it's also the kind of capabilities you want to offer your customers. So telco and media and entertainment are verticals that we work with pretty heavily. And when you look at workloads like SD-WAN or 5G or VPC in telco, there's more and more of a need for telcos to be cloud native providers because the industry is moving away from proprietary hardware to basically white box hardware with open source software for performing these network functions, right? And whether they're deployed in VMs or containers. But the fact is that public clouds are also getting into this space. So I think there's also this competitive dynamic in terms of having to invest in your own IT as a way of disarming or disintermediating your competition, which in a lot of cases now is the public cloud, as the public cloud for the whole stack. Yep.
From our own perspective, we recently launched an application that, because it was easier, we started in the cloud, in AWS, for example, and it quickly ran our costs to over $100,000 a month, and
right.
That was huge. And we're actively figuring out how we can leverage our corporate data center to support that exact same thing. A lot of what we're trying to do, and what a lot of our customers are trying to do, is to have that cloud-like feel, that AWS-like experience in their local data center. And, we're able to achieve that with some of the stuff that we're doing with OpenStack in our own environment. So it's pretty cool.
Absolutely, Peter. And we'll talk about some of that as well. So go to the next slide. It really hits on the points that we're making. If the data center is a business enabler, which it has to be, right, for you all to win in your industry, what are the key things what are the must-haves, or what are the nice-to-haves, right? I think all of these are must-haves. Let's talk about them, right? Number one, you want to have agile and flexible infrastructure, which means that you should be able to bring up not just compute or storage or network, but also be able to take applications, complex N-tier applications, whether they're running your departmental level apps or 3-tier Java apps or your microservice-based apps or your NoSQL databases or, you know, really your ERP, whatever have you, and be able to describe to the cloud infrastructure what the runtime looks like so they can be provisioned using a few simple API calls, right? So there's that need for infrastructure to be agile and flexible and software defined in that way. So the other thing is that, you know, like with the public cloud, as we'll talk about, you should be able to get t-shirt size of compute, if you will, based on different users. Users go to a catalog, whether they're infrastructure users or whether they're line of business users or your external customers, right? If you're offering your internal cloud as a service that can be consumed by your partners in the industry, you should be able to simplify it, standardize it, and rationalize your app deployments. And again, always available. That goes without saying. You need to have a very high SLA in which at least 99.9 at which you're available. And then you should be able to define your business services and bring them up. And again, security is something that we focus a lot on at Platform 9. But again, owing to time, we've basically taken just a cursory look at that. But the idea is that you should be able to govern the usage of your private cloud across different lines of business, across different regions, and across different geographies in a large global heterogeneous enterprise. And we understand and completely get that, right? But at the same time, you want to be cost effective. I think this is the key is the fact that if I could just pick 3 qualities of what makes a super efficient private cloud, a competitive private cloud implementation, you want to be efficient at doing all of these things, but you also want to be able to scale up and down based on your business requirements or spikes. At the same time, you want to be cost effective. And this is an extremely important point, and this is something that I hold as gospel. If your private cloud is successful, you're also cost effective. If you're buying a massive business transformation project from the likes of one of the big vendors, and that is resulting in multiple cost overruns, and then you've not been effective. All you've done is taken your problem with technical debt or, you know, high public cloud spend that costs you to go to Amazon or Azure in the first place, and just simply replicated that headache in your private cloud, along with all the added cost of running large teams of sysadmins, et cetera. So again, simple benchmarks include how many sysadmins per VM or per node or per group of nodes or, you know, per 100 VMs, right? That you want to basically be able to get to the point of the web scale in driving the cost down. And again, finally, depending on the right reasons, right price, right type of business reason, you want to be able to deploy a workload, whether that's to the edge or whether that's to the core data center. So again, we are focusing pretty heavily on edge and edge architectures, edge platforms and other webinars. But again, just to mention that is the workload has to be deployable using your private cloud automation and your private cloud platform to the right area using either a simple click or an API call. So given all of this, what are some of the key challenges that we find customers running into while building private clouds? Peter?
You know, actually, you know, one of the things that I was going to ask or think about here on this slide as you were kind of talking through it is, you know, that cost-effective model there. And, you know, especially in times of COVID and what's happening in our economy, companies are really trying to do more with less people. And I really see that, you know, that software defined, the second bullet point on this, and fully automated is an absolutely critical component of having the data center as a business enabler, right? That software defined aspect, do everything with zero human touch, enable self-service usage, enable your end users to be able to spin up and spin down VMs, set quotas up for different business groups, right? Because a lot of times we see our customers spinning up architectures, then they get moved on to another project, they leave that one up, they spin up another one, and then maybe 3 months later, they come back to the original one. But meanwhile, we're consuming and wasting compute. So I think it's really important, you know, to have quotas and leases on these kind of, you know, infrastructure and virtualized environments.
So one of the points I'd like to highlight as Peter went through that description was the fact that when we look at an efficient private cloud, you're talking not just the app or the compute, but also the network. I think that's a key point, and storage as well. But The primary two ones would be the compute layer and then the network layer. And that's something we hold dear as we kind of work through our offerings with OpenStack as well as Kubernetes. So again, what are some of the private cloud challenges that a lot of customers run into? And again, we've borrowed here somewhat from the analysts here. Peter, next slide.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the questions are, what does the private cloud look like? It's getting increasingly more and more complex, right? And then as that complexity grows, you might have multiple regional data centers. You might be in colos. You might, be leveraging from private cloud. You might have different POPs in your environment, right? And what are some of those challenges that are associated with that? Vamsi, do you have some thoughts on what those challenges are?
No, absolutely right. Number one, silos of compute or silos of business operations are a big challenge, right? The fact that over time, organically, companies have developed silos of infrastructure. And again, talking about it from pure infrastructure and a cloud architect standpoint, you've got a lot of bare metal, you've got obviously a lot of VMware, you've got some OpenStack that's being tried as a science project, or you got some organic deployments that have grown, and you've got the public cloud. And that's a key point. The second is manual work, right? And that speaks to the fact that a lot of the operations in terms of installing frameworks, upgrading frameworks, monitoring them, it is either multiple panes of glass or multiple planes of manual operation or management, right? And then complexity. Quite a few times we have customers that are working with vendor A or vendor B or vendor C, and all of those different platforms, and some of them are open source, but a vast majority are proprietary. They've got their own ways of doing things. They've got their own APIs. They've got their own SDKs, and they've got their own automation mechanisms, which is adding more and more complexity. So you're not as strong. Your silos don't add up to one unified whole, or neither do they become that easy. And then again, governance has been a big challenge. We've seen a lot of this with public cloud as well. I have one customer that essentially has had exploding public cloud spend because they are at a given point in time not really aware how much shadow IT is running out there. And this also has the problem of the fact that lines of business and developers find this whole private cloud very inefficient to use. They don't have a superior developer experience. That's something we'll talk about. And all of this adds up to more cost in terms of people, more cost in terms of software licenses, and more cost in terms of developers just waiting around trying to get their job done. Peter, anything to add to that?
It's got to be a pretty daunting task for a lot of enterprise organizations today to, they might have their own data centers. They might buy another company through acquisition and then have more data centers. And then you might have sets of standards in one data center and different standards in another data center. Even at the infrastructure, how am I going to provide, storage to all my VMs? And it might be one storage vendor in one place and another storage vendor in another place. And that's where this complexity is coming from, right? And, it's distributed across a large geography, right? And when we have this complexity, Vamsi, how are people, what are some of the trends that people are doing when they're trying to manage that with less people?
No, absolutely. So Peter, you go to the next slide right there. We'll talk about that in the sense of, again, this is a slide that proves I should not be a graphic artist, or a designer here, but let me take a leap at this, right? So just for only four things that you're going to take away from this, right? One slide that you're going to take away from this webinar is if you talk about a private cloud, what are four things that should be delivered by your private cloud? The first one is, I believe, cost, right? So again, that's at the bottom left corner of the slide, of this picture. Your private cloud, if done right, should cost less than the sum of these silos and way less. And how does that work? So as Peter pointed out, what are some of the ways in which we see industry leaders or forward thinkers save on cost? Number one, the people cost. And what that means is the time to market in setting up production grade clouds should be days. It should not be months. It should not be years. And I'm talking about not just a Mickey Mouse, a couple of apps, but we're talking about, your complex 5, 6, 7, 80 data centers. The ability to set up these clouds to run production grade apps to on-ramp infrastructure, to set up networking on them, all of that should be days. And then the administration across them should all be done via automation across multiple cloud regions, number one. Number two, simplified stack installs, right? When you have a cloud, build it and they shall come, a private cloud. There's not a lot, right? To be able to have a functional cloud, you should be able to have developers go in and then deploy their apps, whether that's open source apps that use things like JBoss, Tomcat, Kafka, MySQL, MongoDB, so on and so forth. Prometheus as an example, but also be able to just deploy an N-tier real-world app using something like an OpenStack heat, right? And then infrastructure should be able to scale up or scale down in seconds. And then all the cloud janitorial work. And again, I use that term with respect. The fact of the matter remains that 70% of the time, on an average, is just used up in terms of patching, installing, upgrading, et cetera, servers, right? I mean, the fact is that adds no business differentiation. So you need a solution that can help demonstrate that building a private cloud can be orders of magnitude cheaper than building a public cloud or building something using tech that's pushed by vendors out there. Second point, open standards. But what do I mean by open standards? What I mean by open standards is real open standards. I don't mean an open source project that's forked, that's modified, that's wrapped, that's redistributed by another company. I want pure open source so that I get rid of all the lock-in that I have with a vendor. So that includes things like Kubernetes, KVM, OpenStack. But you want to be able to implement these using a zero professional services approach. That is my second key criteria for open standards. Number one, real zero vendor lock-in. You don't like the vendor tomorrow, or you want to basically do it yourself. You should be able to still have your old investments working, and they should give you the freedom to be able to do that. And number two, not have massive professional services projects to deliver clouds. Third, cloud native experience, right? Developers are going to be the end game, and developer success and developer experience is going to be the end game on which cloud success is going to be predicated. So am I helping my developers get started rapidly? Are they able to create their CI/CD pipelines, use things like serverless frameworks on containers if they need to? And then basically have 5 nines uptime. And then also have the infrastructure not dictate to the developer what their CI/CD pipeline or their past pipeline looks like, but be unopinionated in that sense. And then finally, favorable economics, right? Again, we go back to this over and over again, but the idea is that you're spending or you're capping and on the VMware cost you're spending or on the public cloud, but using open source, but not in a way that, sure, I've replaced VMware only to have OpenStack that I'm basically going to have to hire 10 people to run my cloud, right? So Peter, anything to add to this before we go into freedom and flexibility?
Yeah, I do. I think that cloud native experience, that AWS-like feel in your local data center is huge. I think when you're building a private cloud, one of the things that we need, you should be considered is, can I deliver a self-service capability to my end users? Can I deliver it with guidelines and rails, but not be too limiting on what they can and can't do? And then I also think it's important that when you're building this private cloud, that it's future-proof as well, right? So we realize, and I think the industry is changing rapidly, that virtualization is going to be around forever, and containers are coming like crazy. Kubernetes is changing the way we deliver and think about applications. And so I think anything that you deploy inside of your cloud should be future-proof and be able to deploy, whether it's VMs today and containers tomorrow, or Kubernetes on top of VMs, or maybe it's the next great thing, but you have to have some open and flexibility in what you're deploying.
Thanks, Peter. Now, so let's talk about freedom and flexibility and openness, right? And you'll see this theme across a lot of the messaging we do here. Number one, if you truly have a free private cloud that keeps your costs low and makes you successful, it's got to work with your existing infrastructure. And what that means is, if you've got VMware, it should be able to play well with your VMware, manage your VMware, in some cases, deploy to VMware, right, if the need be, and then manage the metal. What that means is being able to deploy your operating systems to bare metal infrastructure or Kubernetes to bare metal, right? And in some cases with Kubernetes, even be able to work with the public clouds, and then deploy any kind of workload, which means any runtime you can take. You want to be able to run that, be that bare metal VMs, containers, whatever, or a mix, right? You can run containers on VMs or containers on bare metal. Be able to take any Dockerized image in the case of containers and be able to run that, right? And in the case of VMs, take any N-tier application that's legacy that works on a VM to be able to deploy to a VM, but to do that using automation. And then location shouldn't have to matter, right? This is one key thing we see when we work with a lot of edge customers, is that you should have the freedom to deploy containers/VMs to either edge cloud, CDN, retail stores, POP locations in telco, or your average corporate data center, right? And then finally, zero vendor lock-in to be able to manage infrastructure and platform services. And if that means working with de facto standards, that is Ansible and Terraform, so be it. So that you have the skills that can be transferable across, different resources that you use, and, base everything on upstream open source. So again, I've done this for 2 decades. I could tell you all that people tell you that Kubernetes or OpenStack in the community are inadequate. They're not secure. They're this, they're that. I don't believe a word of that. Kubernetes at this point powers some of the world's largest web scale shops. OpenStack runs in every telco. So again, whether you're using one or both, or just two independently, whether you're using Kubernetes on VMware or Kubernetes on public cloud or Google, the idea is that pure upstream open source software is what keeps your private cloud free and interoperable. So Peter, any comments on this?
Yep. I think it's really key when you're developing your private cloud and going down that path that you're able to manage the metal. What I mean is you want to be able to control the compute inside of your data center at the OS level. If you want to shoot a server and then rebuild it, and today it's OpenStack with VMs, and tomorrow you want it to be Kubernetes on bare metal. If you can't manage it from the OS level up, it's critical. Then you can't have that flexibility, that ability to deploy and redeploy a individual server. And also, this gives you the ability to say, oh, we're expecting heavy traffic for the Christmas season or something like that. And now I want to scale my Kubernetes cluster. Maybe I want to shrink my development VM infrastructure, reassign some of that compute to my Kubernetes cluster running my production environment. And then when we're through our peak load, reprovision those servers right back to a VM infrastructure under OpenStack. You need to have that kind of flexibility.
No, thank you, Peter. So in the next slide, we'll talk about why, before we get into the product and talk about the platform. Peter, do you want to talk about why private clouds fail, but public clouds work, typically, from an engineering standpoint?
Sure, we can jump into that, right? One of the things about public clouds is they do everything through automation, right? If there's not an API for it, they develop the API. They don't want to have human touch to do anything, right? And so they invest very heavily on their capabilities internally to be able to manage their environments, right? While in contrast to that, right, the enterprises, they have people sharing resources. They might be doing 2 different jobs, right? They're not focused on just developing the automation to be able to, add features to their private cloud to give it that cloud-like experience, right? Another thing is platform engineering in the clouds is massive. They have hundreds of people, from very awesome companies like VMware, Google, and Facebook, and things like that have been there and done that and building processes into their environment, where the enterprises are typically, working at a much smaller scale, right? A lot of the companies that I talk to, they have 7 to 10 to 20, enterprise or cloud architects supporting their private cloud, right? And that's very limiting for them. So I think that a lot of our customers and are looking for something that helps make that easier for them. So back to you, Vamsi, on that.
No, thank you, Peter. So again, let's look at what the platform line approach is really, right? I mean, we've spent a lot of time here talking about why public clouds are good and what they do. And they're very strong at things like automation You know, whether you're talking about end-to-end automation, right from the time you rack hardware to the time you deploy and monitor your apps, and you upgrade the apps or the operating system or the infrastructure, you know, and then, or, you know, you talk about the fact that operationally, these public clouds are more efficient than enterprise teams. Let's talk about what the platform 9 approach is to provide you with all these things we spoke about in your private cloud. Peter, you want to talk to this?
Sure. So I think, you know, as people are building their private clouds, some of the things that they're looking for is if they can work with a SaaS provider to help manage their infrastructure, to automate the deployment of OpenStack, to automate the deployment of Kubernetes, right? Help them with day 2, give them an out where they can actually call somebody for support. I think that's a lot of what they're looking for today, because everybody is doing more with less, right? And I think a lot of enterprises today are really trying to, you know, they're going down that path of Kubernetes. They're thinking about their enterprise architects. They're people that are working in the office of the CTO are trying to figure out Kubernetes. They're trying to figure out how we're going to enable our DevOps team in each of their organization, and what containerization is going to mean, and if there's going to be benefits to their organizations. But this private cloud needs to be able to support what they're doing, right? And I think also another key is, you know, if you're building a private cloud, you want to be able to leverage your existing commodity hardware, right? Use everything that you've got. You know, you don't have to use high-end hyper-converged hardware to be able to do this. You know, a lot of hypervisors today go barely used, right? And I think you know, being able to use commodity hardware for light workloads would be a great way to go. Any thoughts, Vamsi?
No, so again, the innovation the platform 9 brings in, as Peter pointed out, is a SaaS managed plane, right? And it classical traditional data center or colo. It's more your POP or more your store or whatever have you. Being able to deploy your clouds as different regions, right? And then one of the other things we're focused on is eliminating the virtualization tax. So if you want to, again, yep, absolutely. So we talk about the platform 9 approach in that regard. And our flagship offering is around OpenStack, which Peter will talk about here in a second. But the core idea remains that using the SaaS managed control plane and the managed service that Platform 9 provides, you're able to deploy clouds that on-ramp your hardware as clouds, but at the same time get the self-service experience, and then use that to deploy apps that are you know, for telco or for, you know, whatever have you. And then you also use things around OpenStack, right? You know, I see a question about DPDKs or IOV. Absolutely. We've done a lot of work with telcos in supporting that kind of low latency workloads using the OpenStack approach. And Peter and his team themselves have been in the forefront of several of these wins where, you know, we're basically providing OpenStack as a production ready service without any of the headache that, you know, has and cost overruns that have been run into, that are the stories are out there, the horror stories are out there with other vendors, and basically also ensuring that your upgrades are easy and you don't have to live with, you know, all of these sacred cow clusters, right? You touch the cluster, then you have a business failure. Peter, do you want to talk about production ready OpenStack?
Yeah, so one of the things that Platform 9 does is, I like to say, we deliver rock solid production ready OpenStack. And we deliver it in a way that nobody else in the industry does it. We do it faster than everybody. I can stand up an OpenStack cluster in a matter of less than an hour. In this example, I stood up in an hour, and I was teaching somebody how to do it. And it was a 4-node OpenStack cluster. We have done multiple POCs with customers that are using SRIOV. And, you know, in doing one of those POC wrap-ups that we did for one of those big telco customers, we actually deployed a Kubernetes not a Kubernetes cluster, an OpenStack cluster. We deployed it on top of an OS. We set up huge page support. We set up CPU pitting for the OS. We set up CPU pitting for the VMs so that we can guarantee the throughput CPU to those VMs and guarantee the throughput on the SRIOV level. So it was pretty good. What Platform 9 does is we deliver upstream OpenStack, right? We're very close to trunk. We actually don't modify it in any way, shape, or form. We deliver that as a SaaS managed service. Then Platform 9 delivers anything that we install, we manage, we monitor for availability, right? And whenever there's an outage in your OpenStack environment, our alerts, our operations team are alerted. We're alerted through a Grafana interface. We're alerted through Slack. We're alerted through a paging interface. And then we're also, any of the alerts and alarms that come in, if you click a link on the Slack channel, for example, we get directly to a wiki page on how to resolve that problem because we've been there and done that. We've been doing it for over 5 years. You can think of Platform 9 as an extension of your IT staff. We've got your back when managing not only your OpenStack environment for your private cloud, but also Kubernetes in those environments too. We've got full automation around the deployment, management, monitoring, maintenance, and upgrades of OpenStack and Kubernetes. In fact, I'd probably say we've got the simplest zero-touch OpenStack upgrade in the industry, right? We can kick that off through an API, or we can kick it off through our UI, right? And we can do it for you. It's a matter, you can work with our teams to schedule a upgrade of your OpenStack environment from Rocky to Stein to Train, et cetera. We're fully integrated. We're going to be able to run OpenStack where you're running your environment, right? So if you've got colos, we can run there. If you've got local data centers, we can run there. We can run on just about any hardware. We provide a financially backed service level agreement, 24/7, 365. So we guarantee you the availability of your OpenStack environment to a 4 nines of delivery. It's all remote managed, right? So we can, manage your environments remotely. If there is trouble in your environment, right, our operations teams, our support teams, our customer success teams will get on the phone with you guys. We'll get on a Zoom call actually, and we will help you troubleshoot sub-zero environment problems until resolution, and we'll stay on that Zoom call, right? And then our complete offering is going to be PCI compliant, and we're expecting that we're in the final auditing of that now. So.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, you want to talk to this slide as well? I think I did cover it, but would make sense to maybe spend a minute on it before we go into the architecture.
Sure. Okay. So we have the freedom approach, right, with Platform 9, and so I think I covered it quite a lot of it. You're going to be you have the freedom to integrate with your existing infrastructure. We have the capabilities to deploy any types of workloads, VMs, containers, and we can manage it from the bare metal on up, all in a single solution. Right? We avoid vendor lock-in from the public clouds, right? We avoid vendor lock-in from, virtualization environments like VMware and things like that, providing a lower cost alternative. We can deploy where you're doing it, business, right? We can deploy Kubernetes clusters on-prem, in the cloud, or on the edge, and we've got customer examples that have done all of that. And we alleviate the operational complexity of your private cloud by helping you manage that private cloud, helping you deploy that private cloud, and helping you with day 2 operations. So that way your teams can focus on enhancing the private cloud, enhancing the scalability, working with APIs to give that cloud-like experience.
Thanks, Peter. And maybe we can go to the architecture now and talk about how all of this magic is accomplished, right? And let me take a stab at this, and then I'll pass it over to you. A couple of sentences. So two key things to talk about. We've discussed a whole bunch of things in terms of private cloud enablement using OpenStack as well as Kubernetes. So there's 2 different technologies and product lines of Platform 9. The first one is the OpenStack technology that is basically a technology used to give you that, the public cloud feel on the private cloud. But the idea is this: you can bring your VMware clusters, you can bring your bare metal nodes, and you can bring your KVM OpenStack nodes to the party. And then Platform 9 will basically manage all of those for you. And in the case of VMware, that tends to be vSphere Enterprise Plus at the minimum. And then using Kubernetes, you could then deploy Kubernetes, Platform 9 managed Kubernetes. Again, you don't have to use that with our OpenStack. Both are two standalone products, but you can deploy that Kubernetes clusters with the control plane and the workers to any of the underlying landing zones that are shown in this picture. And the SaaS managed control plane or the SaaS managed plane lives in a Platform 9 data center where you're going to have your dedicated management hardware, but using that and the portal that we offer. So we don't black box anything. That's an important point, is you have complete visibility in your clusters, into your metrics, into the usage, into the monitoring, into the apps, into the deployments. But we have our managed services team, which is basically helping you with everything from monitoring the clusters 24/7, deploying apps, upgrading clusters, providing diagnostics and versioning. Peter, anything to add to that?
Just briefly, yeah. So, we do provide that SaaS management plane. We take care of deploying that and managing that for you. That provides you the ability to access our user interface or our APIs, or OpenStack APIs or Kubernetes APIs through that, or directly to the end compute nodes, depending on what you do. That user interface allows you to manage either a OpenStack environment for your private cloud or a Kubernetes environment. And then, as Vansu mentioned, the places where we can deploy are the various cloud providers for Kubernetes. And then in your local data center, we can deploy on top of a Linux OS, on top of bare metal. We can also deploy Kubernetes on top of bare metal or VMs. And it's all done seamlessly through our user interface. But our user interface is an API first user interface. So everything we do has an associated backend API. So most of our customers that I talk to are looking at automating everything, and they use our API for everything. Okay, so let's get into the 6 best practices, Vamsi. I think we're running out of time here.
Yeah. So one of the things we did, everybody, is try to talk from an architect standpoint. What are some of the things we're seeing out there to basically be able to reduce this cost and do all of these great things we spoke about? The first one, so I'll go through each of them, and Peter will chime in as well, provide his color commentary as we go through towards the end. The first thing is keep things open and flexible, right? This day and age, you could save a lot of cost by working with pure open source. Technologies such as OpenStack are right now in the plateau of productivity. The other thing we recommend is use as much bare metal as you want, right? If you want to deploy containerized apps, more specifically, all the multi-tenancy is in Kubernetes, right? So you don't have to invest in virtualization technology. Again, if you want us to support KVM through our OpenStack, happy to do that. That's included in the cost. But again, in general, bare metal is coming back to being a first-class citizen in terms of the cost and the security it can provide, and then basically use more open source than you can. So Peter, I know your teams do a lot of work around implementations. You want to talk about where you're kind of seeing bare metal as an option?
Oh my gosh, we're seeing bare metal everywhere. It is a critical component. Some of our customers have, retail edge locations, thousands of them across North America. And they really like our solution because they have the capability of they have 2 servers in each store. And those servers, we can manage them from a bare metal capability. So right now, today, they are reprovisioning those slowly over time to be OpenStack hosts, and then they're going to run virtualized environments on there, and they're going to run a Kubernetes cluster in that VM environment, which is cool. But their long-term goal is to be able to switch from a virtualized environment to running everything in their stores inside of Kubernetes. So the idea behind bare metal is super key in order to reprovision that at a later date, so they could run and take away that virtualization layer if they want to, and run Kubernetes directly on the metal. So that's one of the big areas that we're running into it.
Thanks, Peter. Let's go to the next one. Number 2, single pane of glass, right? That's a key point. If you have Amazon, AKS, GKE, and then PKS or OpenShift, you're basically going to end up with multiple management consoles, multiple types of infrastructure, and your apps are again logged into the cloud provider or the technology provider. So we recommend open source technology, open source Kubernetes that we certify and we contribute to from an engineering standpoint. But we certify on all of these clouds, including OpenStack and VMware and bare metal in the private cloud. But the idea is that we have this single pane of glass, again, that can manage all of these workloads from one location. at the same time, you're able to, by the role that you perform in the organization, infrastructure, DevOps, and using the security mechanism that you have defined in your RBAC, be able to show the view based on the appropriate level. Peter?
Yep. I guess that any infrastructure, any workload thought, makes me think about the monolithic application, right? I see a huge trend in the industry where, there are existing monolithic applications. Those are being containerized as is, and that has some benefits and has some drawbacks. But I also see those monolithic apps becoming micro monoliths, and even some of those micro monoliths then becoming some services, and some of those services ultimately becoming microservices, and they're breaking up those monolithic apps, and they're running them in a combination of environments. It will run in VMs, and it will run in containers under Kubernetes. So I think being able to support is key.
Yeah, perfect, Peter. Next one.
Yep, go.
So again, team, we're trying to wrap up quickly, so we have enough time for questions. A lot of questions have come through in the panel window here. But again, this goes back to centralized management, but it's also about self-service, right? We have an awesome console that can be used by developers, infrastructure people, developers to provision the workloads so that IT gets out of the way, and then infrastructure people so that everything can be managed using one remote control plane. Peter?
Yeah, that single control plane, it allows you to control everything from the Kubernetes cluster to the pods running inside of a Kubernetes cluster to VMs. This control plane, to answer one of the questions I saw here, is running in Platform 9 data center. It is in a packet data center inside of Equinix today with backup to AWS. Okay, so again, the key is we're providing a single interface to manage everything that you're doing across your entire private data center with one user interface and one API.
Got it. And going back to the single pane of glass, the other thing is whether you're running OpenStack, bare metal, VMware, and for deploying Kubernetes on Amazon, it's still one region. Each of those are one logical region in your single pane of glass. And you could basically also provide centralized monitoring and alerts. And then admins can do things around thresholding or alerting for app performance, hardware, characteristics, and infrastructure failures. And again, all of this backed up by the SLA that Platform 9 provides.
Yep, thanks. Let's go to the next one.
So the other point here is to basically be able to do the application deployments, right? We at Platform 9 recognize a cloud is only usable when developers use it to deploy complex apps, and infrastructure does the same. We support blueprints and templates using OpenStack, Heat, and Murano. But the idea really is that you can basically, at scale, set up your templates and then specify your dependencies on the environment, on other apps. And then with Kubernetes, basically use a GitOps type of deployment model. And we have an application catalog that you can reuse for this purpose or use as a starting point.
Yep. And so just to add on to that, the top bullet there, avoiding snowflakes, is so critical. I have one of our customers in Europe that is, in like the Home Depot of Europe, and what they have is 1,200 stores across the EU, and they have 1,200 stores, but they're all unique. Every store, the way they've grown, and the way how they got to this place, but ultimately what happened is every store, it has a unique set of servers, unique set of applications, unique IP addressing, unique names for the same services. And they're very much looking forward to leveraging Platform 9 and the ability to have a software-defined store and deploy things in a programmatic way, taking the people and the process out of it. That'll help them as far as their troubleshooting and all their capabilities when they're, dealing with the store infrastructure.
Got it. Again, one last thing is embrace Kubernetes, right? And maybe this is preaching to the choir here, but looking at Kubernetes as a way of jumpstarting your private cloud, and then to help developers build release pipelines pretty quickly, and then have the infrastructure and the provider like Platform 9 handle all the HA and the scalability. I think it's a very obvious point in today.
Yep, be ready for Kubernetes because it's coming if you're not already deeply engaged with it.
So let's go to quickly our conclusions, and then we can stop for questions and then pick our winner. The first one is managed public cloud. Private clouds will solve your complex infrastructure challenges, right? What makes the private cloud much more than capable is having the notion of SaaS management. And then we can prove all of these values to you in our proof of concepts. There's also the free tier that we'll quickly talk about on the last slide after questions. But the idea is to use automation end to end to reduce cost. And then, you know, if your private cloud is going to use a mix of VMs, bare metal containers, no problem, right? And then you can basically leverage pure open source and low touch operations to get the same feel as you get on an Amazon or an Azure on the private data center. And to be honest, this is the approach that Platform 9 has been doing for 6 years. That is now being followed by Anthos or Outposts or some of these other public cloud managed offerings that deploy in your private cloud. Peter?
No additional comments on this one.
Got it. So Kamesh, let me just open to you for questions, but once we do that, we can just go through our price and then the next steps. But again, this slide talks about how we eliminate most of the points of failure in private cloud implementations. You can all read through this, but basically a reiteration of what we've been discussing so far. Kamesh?
Thanks, thank you so much. This is Kamesh. I just wanted to moderate some of the questions. We're getting lots of questions here. There is one right here that says, do you support auto scaling for Kubernetes cluster worker nodes? And if yes, how?
Peter, you want to do that?
So yeah, we support auto scaling of Kubernetes nodes in an AWS environment. It's a brand new feature to our AWS offering. And so we do that by configuring some metrics that we look at for CPU and memory. And then when they cross a threshold, then we'll scale the cluster.
And we're also working on a VMware provider for the same as well. And I think there's some work ongoing also in the horizontal pod auto scaling capability. Kamesh?
Yeah, do you support working with VMware on premises?
Big time, yes. Short answer, yes, totally, absolutely.
All right, question around load balancing. How do you configure and work with load balancers both in the public cloud and
with the public cloud, Kamesh, we integrate with existing ELBs like in AWS. And so when we create a Kubernetes cluster in the public cloud, we create the VMs, we create the network, or use an existing VPC. We then create security groups allowing our working nodes and master nodes to communicate. And then when you create a pod, we support, or create a service and expose it as a service type load balancer. That'll create an entry in the ELB. As it relates to a private cloud initiative, right, we can deploy Metal LB, and then every service that you get will get a range of IPs that then can be exposed directly on your network.
Thank you. There was a private chat question, but I think it's a good one for the broader audience too. What networking options do you support for both OpenStack and Kubernetes?
For OpenStack, we support, neutron networking and DVR, and we leverage OVS underneath that. For Kubernetes, we support multiple CNIs, so you can deploy Flannel or Calico or Canal out of the box through our UI. If you want to deploy an additional CNI, we support Multis, where you can deploy Multis inside of your Kubernetes clusters and then ultimately deploy another, like the SRIOV CNI or things like that would tag some way. So we're pretty flexible from the CNI perspective.
Yeah, I think this question was asked before, but I think it'd be good to kind of focus on the rolling upgrades for both Kubernetes and OpenStack, and how is there any difference between the two?
Sure. So in a Kubernetes environment, we cordon a node, we evacuate that node of all running processes. We start with the one master node of your master node clusters, and we then upgrade that cluster. Then we uncordon that node and allow workloads to come back onto that node. And then we go to the next master and the next master, and then we cycle one at a time through the same process with worker nodes. From an OpenStack perspective, we work with our customers to deploy, schedule a upgrade. 90% 99% of the time, we don't require any downtime to running VMs inside the environment. It's a matter of just upgrading OpenStack, for example, Pike to Rocky or something like that. And we can do it. We do it in a rolling fashion, right? So if it is required that there might be downtime to a VM, or we might have to upgrade libvirt or KVM or QEMU or some of the underlying processes that would require a downtime, we can live migrate the VMs off of that environment, move them to a new environment, and then we can put that node into maintenance mode, upgrade that specific that node, and bring it back online.
Right. One of the things I've seen with OpenStack as well is there are multiple ways to do this. You can model each site as an OpenStack region, or you can model each site as an OpenStack compute availability zone, or a combination of both. But the idea is same, is to basically at the end of the day, work with the customer to understand what version they want certain clusters to be in, and then go do a graceful upgrade, both for OpenStack and Kubernetes separately or together, so that there's zero downtime. And in the case of Kubernetes, there's a lot of pod, things like ensuring that we basically gracefully ensure that the pods are not processing traffic, or if they are, then that's carried over to other nodes so that we can upgrade each node as we need to.
Got it. Thank you. I think this question was asked before, but I'll ask it anyway. Where are Platform 9 services running? Is it in an AWS instance or somewhere in a DC?
Yeah, I answered that question earlier, but to answer the question now, we run in a packet data center in Equinix. That's where our primary operations are. We also have backup to AWS in the event that we have problems in that environment.
Got it. Folks, we are almost out of time here.
We have this whole series going on private and edge clouds. Please join the rest of these. You can find them at the link there. But if you want a demo from us of this solution, what the platform looks like architecturally, and then there's a free service that you can sign up for from a Kubernetes standpoint. We're working at one for OpenStack as well, but just to get you an idea of the power of the platform across a small lab deployment, 2 or 3 nodes, right? Again, thank you for your time here.